What's up everyone, Harry over at Tackle Express. The rock fishing season is here, and in this video we're going to be covering all the essential goodies that you're going to need, from hooks, weights, baits, a different variety of lures and a variety of different sizes. We're also going to cover rods and reels in different depths of water, which is also going to relate into what size jig we're going to pick. So let's get ready and get ready to go rock fishing. When targeting rockfish in Southern California, there's a handful of different rigs that we can choose, but one of the most simple and basic rigs out there, which is probably one of the most productive, is going to be the double dropper loop rig, which is a hook down here in the middle and then another hook up above, and your sinker would be down on the bottom. So in order to get this rig all started up, we are going to need to start with a torpedo sinker, a choice of hook of whatever you guys would like to fish. For instance, this is an Owner Aki Twist 1.0. This is probably one of my most popular suggested hooks personally, because in the 1.0 size, it's a very nice size. You could fish strips of squid, all the different varieties of fin bait, sardines, anchovies, your smaller mackerel, and it is big enough that you could even put a small full squid on there. So for that reason, that is one of my more preferred options to suggest. But going with the double dropper loop rig, there are a few knots that are required in order to tie that. So for some of our more novice anglers that are visiting this video, here are some P-line rock cod rigs. These are already pre-made. All you got to do is simply tie on your main line and clip in a sinker. So with these rigs, they're about 30 or 40 pound tests. They have a swivel that is used to tie the main line from your rod and reel, and then it's got a smaller swivel clip on the bottom that would allow you to clip in your sinker and get you down to your desired depth that you might be fishing. For those of you that would like to learn how to tie that double dropper loop knot, visit our YouTube channel and scour on through, and we show an in-depth video of exactly how to tie that double dropper loop knot, as well as other essential knot videos. But finishing up with the rockfish rig with the double dropper loop, choosing a sinker is all going to be very dependent upon how deep we're going to be dropping or how the conditions are. Conditions can include weather in terms of wind, current, depth. All of that will make a very big difference of which size sinker we're going to fish. For instance, we have a teeny tiny size 4 and we have a much larger 28 ounce sinker. So fishing, say, 100 to 150 feet, you can do just fine with a 6 to 8 ounce sinker. But if you're going to be dropping upwards of 300 to 600 feet, a 16 to 20 ounce sinker is required at a minimum, because that's also going to be thinking about any upcoming weather, current, wind, any of that. Having a sinker that's a little on the larger side is going to allow you to get to those deeper depths. In Southern California, our rockfish get their name for a good reason, and that's because they like to hang out in the rocks. So when dropping down our double dropper loop rig with a torpedo sinker, depending on the weight, that's going to determine on the depth that we're fishing, wind conditions, current conditions, that's all going to relate on how to choose the correct sinker. But when you finally select the right sinker, you're going to drop this thing all the way down to the bottom of the ocean floor. You're going to click it into gear and take 1 to 3 turns up off the bottom. Reason why you're going to do that is because if these are laying in the rocks, there's a really good chance that they'll get snagged, you'll break them off, and you'll lose them, have to tie on another one. So what I like to do, hit all the way to the bottom, flick it into gear, 1, 2, 3 turns up off the bottom, and hang out for a minute. And after a little while, I might send my reel back into free spool to allow this sinker to hit back to the bottom again. Reason being is there's a couple reasons. I'd say collectively a good 90% of the time we're typically drifting. So we're not set on anchor, we're not fishing one individual rock pile, we're fishing a vicinity and we're drifting along covering the entire rock itself. So while drifting, the bottom of the ocean has contours. It can get a little shallower, it can get a little deeper. So figure if you just simply take 2 turns up off the bottom and never drop it back down, as you're drifting, you might go from fishing the bottom floor here being here, but then it moves and now you're in 20 feet up off the bottom. So that's a really good reason why I would drop all the way to the bottom, into gear, 1-2 turns up off the bottom, give it 10 to 20 seconds, drop it back down and repeat that process. Then when we finally get fortunate enough to hook a fish, a lot of the time you'll have your rod and reel dangling off the side of the boat, reels in gear, you might be 1 to 3 turns up off the bottom and you're just sitting there hanging out. You'll notice at the end of your rod tip will start to kind of bounce and jiggle and dance a little bit. That's when you know that you have a bite. I personally give myself a little bit of a swing as I turn the handle. So what that's doing is I'm driving that hook and I'm picking up the slack while I lift. Other guys, they'll just straight turn the handle. It's all a preference. Again, I personally get a little bit of a nump and start turning the handle pretty much at the same time. If you all liked this video, feel free to ring that bell to be notified on our next video. Like and subscribe, and feel free to drop a comment down below what you thought about this rock fishing video, and if you're planning to get out and do some rock fishing yourself this season. Moving along, we're going to start taking a look at a variety of different artificial lures that can make rock fishing a little bit more enjoyable. But before we move on and cover that aspect, 9 times out of 10, a lot of the time going out on these rockfish boats, we are typically drifting and not on anchor. So with that being said, if the wind is in your face, you're in the right place. Reason being is if the wind is blowing to you, that naturally means the boat is going this way, while your line would be going that way. Rather than you being on the other side of the boat, your line would go underneath the boat and wrap everybody else that's on the right side of the boat with the wind in their face. But without further ado, we're going to take a look at some of these awesome artificial lures that we can look to target some of our rockfish. Looking at these guys, the Berkeley Gulp, we have swimming mullets. These ones happen to be the Grub series. The really nice thing about these, and going in relation to the Owner AquaTwist 1.0 hooks that I suggested earlier for rock cod fishing. That hook will work really, really good in these. Reason why this is on the counter today to suggest. Sometimes not all of us want to have to walk back and forth getting over to the bait tank to grab a sardine, an anchovy, or a piece of squid. Having one of these guys, as you can see in the package, it has this scent that is already incorporated in the package as well as in the bait. So rather than you having to go and get to the bait tank to get a piece of bait for scent, you can simply use one of these, catch fish after fish, and not have to go and pick up a separate piece of bait. I fish this with a double dropper loop with the correct size sinker depending on the depth and conditions that are going on for that particular day, with a set of 1.0 Owner AquaTwist hooks. Now, looking at some of these metal jigs, we got the Ahis. These are really, really nice. These particular options are 8 ounce with a single hook. They do make a few other options in terms of treble hooked baits, different weights and colors. These are really nice baits when it comes to just simply popping and jigging off the bottom. Rockfish are where they get their name, rocks. They like to hide and be in the rocks. That's where they're gonna be the safest. It's where their coverage is. So what I'm gonna do with this is drop it all the way down to the bottom, maybe take 1 or 2 turns up, and I'm gonna lift my rod and let it sink all the way back down. Lift my rod, let it sink back down. And what this jig's gonna do is gonna go up, and it's gonna flutter and dart back down. So fishing on any isolated rocks, this is gonna bring a big rockfish out of the depths and look for you. Couple other options. We got some of these Colt snipers or current snipers. I have 2 different sizes and a few different colors. This is a 60 gram candy eye washi, and this is a 120 gram blue pink. The 2 different sizes is going to determine upon what depth that you are fishing. The 60 gram is really good to fish from, say, 50 to maybe about 100, 150 feet at the most. And again, that is all very dependent upon conditions. If it's very windy, if there's a lot of current, this little 60 gram jig might not quite get you down to the bottom. But then you could jump up a size and you could get yourself a 120. This one can be fished upwards of 300 feet, all dependent upon weather. With weather being spectacular, figure this guy is gonna fish the best from 100 probably to 150, 200 feet of water. if you're going to be looking to target some of the deeper water cod, because out here in Southern California, depending on what time of the year in the season it is, will determine what depths that we can fish. We might be able to fish unlimited. That means we can touch 300 feet or 3,000 feet of water. On any of our local boats, the most that I've ever been told is about 8 to 850, which is still a very, very long way down to the bottom, hence why they make such large torpedo sinkers like we spoke with before. But these Shimano butterfly flatfall jigs are very, very nice as well. And when you start throwing these artificial jigs, you could catch a variety of different species. There's a tremendous amount of different species of rockfish. Vermilions, reds, chuckleheads, just to name a few. But going with these larger profiled baits, you could also look for your more predatory lingcod, and they just so happen to really like these flat falls. And I'll fish these jigs, all honesty, not much different than how I'd fish the Colt snipers. I'd sink them all the way down to the bottom, maybe take 1 or 2 turns up from the bottom, lift the rod up, let it slowly flutter and do its thing back down, lift, fall, lift, fall. And I'll do that, and I always want to make sure my line is as vertical as I possibly can be. You don't really want your line scoped going out on the horizon. Reason being is you're not straight up and down. You're not going to have the sensitivity to really know when you got a bite. When it's out off the horizon, it makes it a little more difficult. So if you're having that issue, your jig is simply going off into the sunset and you can't stop it, flick it a little bit up swell. That way, as the boat's drifting coming to your lure, it's going to be sinking and should hopefully be right in front of you by the time you make it to the bottom. Speaking of lingcod, we have lingcod killers over here. We have the living squid as well as the ling killer. These two baits specifically, you're not really looking for a ton of fish. You're looking for one big fish to seal the deal and get a picture of a lifetime. If you just simply want to catch fish and you don't care how you do it, fishing a double dropper loop, a Colt sniper, a little flatfall, something on the smaller side. But if you're simply looking for the biggest fish that's out there and you want that jackpot, some of these big lingcod jigs could definitely incentivize a big fish to hop on your line. Or one of my more personal favorites are hookup baits. They make a variety of different sizes, different colors. There's a variety of different ways that you could fish them. A lot of the ways that I will personally do them is you could use a 3-way swivel. I'd say this is a little bit more advanced. This is for some of you guys that want to step outside of your comfort zone and do something a little different. But utilizing a 3-way swivel, you could put a 3 to 6 ounce hookup bait on the bottom and then a smaller 1 to 3 ounce on top. And that's going to give you a dancing effect on the way down. Once you reach your desired depth near the bottom, as you pop, these things are going to dance, twitch, and go in between. But the way that I tend to fish these is just simply on my dropper loop. Instead of tying a double dropper loop and adding one of your hooks that you'd like to fish, this is the Owner Aki Twist 1.0. Instead of putting 2 of those on there, I might put 1 hookup bait on the bottom and then a hook on top with a piece of squid. I can drop these down and really get an idea of what those fish are looking to eat. Before I move on to rods and reels, some options that are going to make your fishing day out on the water a whole lot better. Whether you do or do not get seasick, or if you don't know, having some sort of seasickness medication is essential. For instance, this is Bonine. There is also the option of Dramamine and a few other options out there. Bonine happens to be my preference when I do take it. It's a lot less drowsy and it doesn't get me feeling all funky and keeps me out on the water. Over here, having a bait towel is very, very nice for when you go over to the bait tank, you get your hands all slimy full of fish, squid, whatever it may be. Having this little carabiner clip allows you to clip to your belt and simply wash off, dry off your hands without getting your pants dirty. Another option is a set of pliers. Not always, but a lot of the times when fishing's really good, the deckhands can get really busy, and it always sucks when you're sitting waiting for the deckhand to come and hook your fish. Having your own set of pliers would allow you to simply unhook your fish, pin another piece of bait, get this thing back down in the water, and hook a couple more fish by the deckhand comes around to pick up your fish. Moving on to rods and reels, and we're also going to discuss the type of line that we would suggest to fish on these reels. But for instance, I have a couple reels out here to show you guys. There are a few options that are definitely a little less expensive, but these aren't too bad. These are more middle of the road, very, very nice quality product, but both of which are 2-speed. And there's a really good reason as of why I picked these reels being 2-speed, because out here in Southern California, we can fish a wide variety of depths. On average, we're looking 300 to 600 feet, but sometimes that can change. It can be a little shallower, could be a little deeper, but all dependent upon conditions as well. If there's a tremendous amount of current, there's a lot of wind, you're gonna be fishing a sinker that might be 16 to 20 ounces in weight. You're gonna have 2 hooks. Now you hook 2 fish. They have their mouths wide open, and now you're winding 750 feet all the way back up to the top with 2 fish with their mouths wide open, so now you're grabbing all that water tension. So, crazy amount of line per turn of the handle. Eventually, we're gonna get tired. Even myself, I'd like to think I have a whole lot of energy and I can't use it all, but rock fishing does get to be a little bit tiring. So once I get tired of turning that handle, trying to take in nearly 3 feet per turn, I'm just simply gonna click this guy into low gear, and now it acts as a winch. I'm not gonna be taking in as much line, but I'm gonna have more torque and power, which is gonna be easier on me. It's gonna allow me to continue dropping one after another without getting too fatigued. That's gonna put me into the galley and have to take a break. Again, I did mention that these guys are more middle of the road. If you wanted some less expensive options, for instance, I have a Penn Fathom 25 narrow. I have this Abbott MXJ, but some of your less expensive items, if you don't want to spend a whole lot or our budget doesn't allow, a Daiwa Seagate's a really nice option, a Penn Squall, just to name a few other options. These 2 reels are very, very comparable in terms of their line capacity. Generally, on this size of a reel, we're typically recommending 50 to 65 pound braided line, and that's going to give you roughly 300 to 400 yards worth of line. There is a term that we utilize in the fishing industry called scope, and what scope is when your line begins to get taken out onto the horizon, and instead of keeping you straight up and down in vertical, the line begins to scope out. It is pretty essential to keep your line as vertical as you possibly can. Not always can you be perfectly vertical, but you also don't want to be 100 yards out into the sunset. That's going to kind of take away from your bites. You're not going to be able to feel it. When you do finally get a bite, or you think you have a bite, you might be too slow in catching up with the amount of slack that's out there. So talking about dropping it down, winding up, dropping it back down, that's gonna help avoid or minimalize some of your scoping aspects. But if it simply gets too far out on the horizon, wind it in, drop it back down to try and keep as vertical as you possibly can. Speaking on that, I was recommending 50 and 65 pound braid, which is usually the correct line size to do on either of these size reels, which I would still say is. But the thinner the line you go, whether that be a 30 or a 40 pound braid, because of the thin diameter, it's gonna cut through the water a lot better, and you're gonna have a lot less issues with scoping. But if you plan to do any other fishing outside of rock fishing in the future, going with what I would call a more all around or usable size, 50 or 65 would treat you better in more perspective. So that kind of covers some of the rods and reels in the line that we're gonna wanna fish. So I spoke with the braid. Figure 40 to 65 pound braid is where you're gonna wanna be. The thinner the braid, the easier it's gonna cut through the water, the less amount of scope that you're gonna have. Now it's gonna come to the leader. What size line are we gonna fish to our hook? What size line are we gonna fish to our bait or our lure? That is gonna determine upon what size we're fishing. If we're going with just standard double dropper looping for rockfish, fishing our Berkeley product, these little P-line rock cod rigs, or simple basic double dropper loop. I would typically suggest 30 and 40 pound mono or fluorocarbon. You could definitely spend the extra money on fluorocarbon, but rockfish are usually not the most intelligent and they're not too picky on line, so I use the cheap monofilament, which is fantastic line. The only reason why I use fluorocarbon is if figure the bite was a little tough or I want to give myself an upper hand over most. So braided line, 30 to 60 pound test, all dependent upon the size of reel you're fishing, and fishing leaders between 30 and 40 pound test is what I would typically suggest. But if you're going to jump up and fish something in this large caliber lure, this is where heavier line comes into play. I would suggest no less than 40 pound leader on something of this size. Transitioning on over to a rod. For instance, this is a Phoenix Axis. This is kind of very similar to the reels that we selected here, more middle of the ballpark. It's not a super high end. It's also not a low end cheap rod. This is really, really nice for its cost. For instance, the model in my hand, this is a 7'8" heavy action rod, rated 25 to 60 pound test, which is just about perfect. But when it does come to rock fishing, we're usually using pretty heavy weights. Sometimes we're using larger sinkers and we're fishing really, really deep. The longer the rod that you have, the more leverage a fish is gonna have over you. So as you shorten the rod, what typically we suggest for rockfish is between 7, 7'6", and generally nothing longer, or even if we suggest an 8 foot. And reason being, the longer the rod you have, you're fishing, doing your thing, now your fish are hanging on the side of the boat, you need to pull them into the boat. The longer the rod is, the further away it has to get for you to grab those fish to haul up over the side of the rail. Figure if you had a 7 or a 7.5 foot rod, it would be a lot easier to manage. You really wouldn't need a whole lot of help. You could literally bounce them up over, set them on the deck and get ready. But the longer the rod that you have, generally it can cause some issues just of space mobility. You can only get so far back, generally reflecting and needing help from deckhands to pull your fish over. So my recommendation for the length of a rod would be between 7 to 7'6" for rock fishing, that is. And there are other options available on rods as well. This is the Phoenix Axis, a really, really nice middle of the road rod, fantastic warranty and service. Fantastic product in my opinion, but you could look at an Akuma PCH, Penn Carnage rod. There's a few different models out there on the market. You could visit our website and scour along and see exactly what price is going to suit you best for getting out there and doing some rock fishing.
Bonus tips!
Here's a few don't do's out on the water. Number one that we see so very often is winding all the way to the tip. You don't want to wind your sinker to the tip. You don't want to reel your hook all the way to the tip. Reason being is you could compromise or break the insert or even the tip of the rod. That's going to put you out of commission and not allow you to fish out on the water anymore. You also do not want to turn the handle as fast as you possibly can. Rockfish don't pull drag typically. They don't do all this crazy stuff. All you have to do is simply turn the handle steady. The faster you turn, the more those fish spin, the more likely they're gonna fall off the hook before they even get to the side of the boat. Another do not do is going to be pump the rod. So very often you see everybody doing this. Do not do that. Reason being is you lift up 6 feet, you drop 4 feet. You just gave 4 feet of slack for that fish to weasel its way up off of the hook. So number one thing, do not turn the handle too fast. Do not pump the rod. Simply lay it on the rail, hold it in your arm, and just turn the handle nice and steady. That's why they make that fancy 2-speed feature, slower line intake. All you gotta do is turn the handle nice and steady, not too fast. And another one, a very major one, all the rockfish out here in Southern California have a mucus on their spines, and if they stick you, it does not feel good. There is one fish to be extremely concerned on, and that is the California scorpion fish, also known as sculpin. They have actual venomous spines to where if you get stuck, it is going to ruin your day. So to play it safe, Avoid all spines on all the rockfish. If sculpin ever do happen to come over the side of the boat, the deckhands 95% of the time are on it and they're gonna let you know to not touch that fish. But we hope this video helped you guys out to get out there for the rock fishing season. Feel free to drop a comment below of what you felt about this rock fishing video. And until the next one, tight lines, Harry from Tackle Express.